The afternoon sun poured through the tall glass windows of the boutique, casting long golden rectangles across the polished hardwood floor. Outside, the city hummed. Cars honked in the distance, people chatted on the sidewalk, and the occasional siren wailed like a far-off warning. Inside, though, the air felt tight, charged with something sharp and unpleasant. Near the back of the store, a young woman stood frozen, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a silk scarf that had slipped from a display. Her name tag read Tasha, and her eyes were wide with the kind of fear that comes not from a single mistake, but from knowing that no matter what she does, it might never be good enough for the man standing in front of her. He stood with his arms crossed, shoulders squared like a drill sergeant inspecting troops. His suit was expensive, navy blue, perfectly tailored, but it couldn't hide the tension coiled in his jaw or the impatient tap of his polished shoe against the floor. He wasn't yelling, not exactly, but his voice carried that quiet, cutting tone that somehow stung worse than shouting. "You think this is a game?" he asked, his eyes flicking from the scarf in her hands to the empty hook on the display wall. "This isn't some college dorm where you can leave things wherever. This store represents something. Excellence, precision, and you." He paused, letting the word hang like an accusation. "You just tossed it on the counter like it was trash." Tasha swallowed hard. "I was restocking the back room, sir. I must have bumped it when I came through." "Excuses," he cut in, shaking his head. "I don't want your reasons. I want results. Clean it up. And next time, pay attention, because if I have to correct you again, we're going to have a serious conversation about whether you belong here." A few customers nearby glanced over, then quickly looked away, pretending not to hear. One older woman adjusted her sunglasses and moved to the opposite side of the store. No one said a word. That was the thing about this place. It wasn't just elegant on the outside. It had a reputation for being cold, almost clinical in its perfection. And he was the one who enforced that standard with a kind of ruthless pride. He turned away from Tasha without another glance, already scanning the room for the next flaw to fix, the next person to correct. His name was Derek, and he'd been the store manager for nearly 3 years. In that time, he'd turned the location into one of the highest performing in the region, at least on paper. Sales were up, inventory was tight, and customer complaints, official ones anyway, were rare. But the staff turnover told a different story. People came and went like seasons. Some lasted a month, others barely a week. Those who stayed learned to keep their heads down, speak only when spoken to, and never ever challenge him. Derek believed he was doing the right thing. He saw himself as a guardian of quality, a man who refused to let standards slip just because someone felt uncomfortable. He'd grown up hearing that success required discipline, that softness was weakness. And in his mind, this store was his kingdom, a place where order reigned, and chaos was not tolerated. What he didn't know, what almost no one in the store knew, was that the real owner of this boutique was standing just 10 feet away, watching him. She hadn't come in with fanfare or a corporate escort. She wore simple clothes, dark jeans, a soft gray sweater, and flat leather shoes. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she carried a small canvas tote instead of a designer handbag. To anyone glancing her way, she looked like just another shopper, maybe a teacher on her lunch break, or a writer browsing for inspiration, but her eyes missed nothing. She'd seen the way Tasha's shoulders slumped after Derek's reprimand. She'd noticed how the other employees avoided eye contact when he walked by, how they moved more slowly, more carefully, like they were walking on thin ice, and she'd heard every word of his lecture, not just the words themselves, but the tone behind them. The condescension, the assumption that he was always right and everyone else was just a problem to be managed. She'd been coming to this store for months now, always unannounced, always in plain clothes. It was her way of seeing the truth, the kind of truth that never showed up in quarterly reports or staff surveys. She believed that if you wanted to understand a business, you had to see how it treated the people who kept it running when no one important was watching. And today, she wasn't liking what she saw. She moved slowly down the aisle of handbags, running her fingers lightly over the smooth leather of a display piece. Her expression was calm, unreadable, but inside a quiet anger was building. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the slow-burning kind that comes from witnessing something deeply unfair over and over again. She'd built this company from nothing. Started with a single stall at a weekend market, Selling handmade scarves she stitched herself late into the night after her day job. She'd saved every penny, reinvested every dollar, and slowly, painstakingly, turned that tiny dream into a chain of boutiques known for their quality, their style, and most importantly, their values. She'd always insisted that her stores be places where people felt respected, where talent was nurtured, not crushed, and now, here was this man, this manager she'd trusted to uphold those values, acting like a tyrant in her own house. She took a deep breath and walked toward the front of the store, where Derek was now adjusting a mannequin's scarf with exaggerated precision. She stopped a few feet away. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but firm. Derek didn't turn right away. He finished smoothing the fabric, then slowly pivoted, his expression already shifting into the polite but distant mask he used for customers. But when he saw her, just a woman in jeans, no flashy jewelry, no air of wealth, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yes?" he asked, the word clipped, impatient. "I couldn't help but overhear what you said to that young woman back there," she said. "Was that really necessary?" Derek's eyebrows lifted slightly. He straightened his tie, a small gesture of authority. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't know who you are, and I'm in the middle of managing my store." "I'm a customer," she said simply. "And I've been in here before. I've noticed how you speak to your staff. Today it crossed a line." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "With all due respect, you don't understand how this business works. We have standards. If people can't meet them, they don't belong here." "Standards don't require humiliation," she replied, her voice steady. "You could have corrected her privately. You could have shown her how to do it right instead of making her feel small." Derek's jaw tightened. He glanced around, clearly annoyed that this conversation was happening in front of others. "Look," he said, lowering his voice but not softening his tone. "I appreciate your concern, but this isn't your store. You don't get to tell me how to run it." She didn't flinch. "Actually," she said quietly, "it is my store." For a split second, confusion flickered across his face. Then it vanished, replaced by disbelief and then amusement. He actually smirked. "Right," he said, shaking his head. "And I suppose you're the CEO while you're at it?" She didn't smile. She didn't raise her voice. She just looked at him, her eyes steady, her presence suddenly filling the space between them in a way that made the air feel heavier. "I am," she said. Derek stared at her. He searched her face for any sign of a joke, any hint that she was playing some kind of prank. But there was nothing, just quiet certainty. His smirk faded. A flicker of doubt crossed his eyes, but only for a moment. Then his pride kicked in, louder and stronger than reason. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with false patience. "I've worked with corporate. I know what our leadership looks like. And you," he gestured vaguely at her outfit. "You don't fit the profile." She didn't react to the insult. Instead, she reached into her tote bag and pulled out a slim black wallet. From it, she removed a small ID badge, simple, unadorned, but unmistakably official. She held it up just long enough for him to see the name, the title, Chief Executive Officer. And beneath it, the logo of the company he'd been managing for years. Derek's face went pale. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His eyes darted from the badge to her face, then back again, as if trying to reconcile the image in front of him with the powerful executive he'd imagined. The one in designer suits, surrounded by assistants making decisions from a glass-walled office high above the city. This woman didn't look like that, but the badge didn't lie. For the first time in a long time, Derek felt something unfamiliar, uncertainty, and right behind it a cold trickle of fear. But before he could say anything, before he could apologize, explain, or even process what was happening, something inside him snapped. Maybe it was the embarrassment. Maybe it was the years of believing he was untouchable. Or maybe it was just the sheer shock of being called out in front of his staff by someone he'd dismissed as irrelevant. Whatever it was, it made him do something he would regret for the rest of his life. In one swift, reckless motion, fueled by panic and pride, he raised his hand and slapped her across the face. The sound cracked through the store like a gunshot. Silence followed. Thick, stunned, suffocating. Tasha gasped. A customer dropped her shopping bag. Someone near the entrance froze mid-step. The CEO didn't cry out. She didn't stagger back. She simply stood there, one hand rising slowly to her cheek. her eyes never leaving Derek's, and in that moment something shifted, not just in the room, but in the entire future of the store, the company, and he man who thought he was in control. Derek's breath came fast now, his chest rising and falling like he'd just run a race. His hand still tingled from the impact, but the feeling was already being drowned out by a rising tide of horror. What had he done? He opened his mouth to apologize? To explain? He wasn't sure. But before he could speak, she lowered her hand from her face, took one slow step back and said just 2 words, so quiet only he could hear them. "You're done." Then she turned and walked out of the store, her steps calm, deliberate, as if nothing had happened. But everyone knew everything had changed. Behind the glass doors, Derek stood frozen, his face draining of all color, his mind racing in circles. The staff exchanged glances, some shocked, some angry, some almost relieved. No one moved to comfort him. No one spoke to him, and outside, the CEO didn't look back. She walked to her car, got in, and sat for a long moment with her hands on the steering wheel, breathing deeply. Her cheek still burned, but her mind was already moving forward. She knew exactly what came next. And Derek? He had no idea just how quickly his world was about to collapse. The moment the glass door clicked shut behind her, the boutique seemed to exhale. A heavy silence settled over the space, thick with disbelief. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the soft jazz music playing from hidden speakers felt too loud, too intrusive, as if it didn't belong in this new, altered reality. Derek stood exactly where he'd been, his arm still half raised, fingers slightly curled like he'd forgotten how to lower it. His chest heaved, not from exertion but from the sudden, crushing weight of what he'd just done. His mind scrambled, trying to rewind the last 10 seconds, to find a way to undo it. But there was no undo button for slapping your boss in front of half a dozen witnesses. He looked around, desperate for some sign that this wasn't as bad as it felt. But the faces staring back at him weren't confused or sympathetic. They were wide-eyed, yes, but beneath that shock was something colder. Disgust, judgment, even fear, but not of her. Of him. Tasha stood near the scarf display, one hand pressed to her mouth, eyes glistening. Another employee, a stock clerk who'd been quietly folding sweaters near the back, had stopped mid-motion, his arms full of cashmere, his expression unreadable but his posture stiff with tension. Near the register, a customer who'd been browsing handbags slowly backed toward the exit, clutching her purse like she suddenly felt unsafe. Derek's throat went dry. He tried to speak, to say something, anything, but his voice caught. He cleared it, forced out, That wasn't what it looked like." No one responded. He turned to the assistant manager, a quiet woman named Lena, who'd worked under him for over a year. She was the one person he thought might understand, might back him up, but when he met her eyes, she didn't flinch or look away. She just stared at him, her expression flat, unreadable, but her hands were clenched tightly around the clipboard she always carried. "Lena," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "you saw how she came at me, acting like she owned the place." "She does own the place," Lena said quietly, cutting him off. Her voice wasn't angry. It was calm, too calm. "And you just hit her." Derek opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. The truth of it hit him like a second slap. This wasn't some random woman. This was the founder, the CEO, the person who'd built this entire brand from nothing, and he'd struck her on the face in her own store. His stomach twisted. He felt dizzy, like the floor had tilted beneath him. He took a step back, bumping into a display table. A small ceramic vase wobbled but didn't fall. He barely noticed. Outside, through the glass, he saw her walking toward a modest silver sedan parked a few spaces down. She moved with the same quiet dignity she'd carried inside. No dramatic gestures, no shouting, no tears. Just purpose. And that scared him more than if she'd screamed or called the police on the spot. Because this kind of calm, it meant she wasn't reacting in the moment. She was planning. And people like her didn't plan small. Inside the store, the spell finally broke. One customer hurried out without buying anything. Another lingered near the door, whispering into her phone. Tasha slowly bent down to pick up the scarf she'd dropped, her movements careful, like she was afraid to make a sound. Lena stepped forward. "Derek," she said, her voice low but firm. "Go to your office now." He blinked. "What?" "You heard me. Go. Don't talk to anyone. Don't touch anything. Just go." For a second, he wanted to argue, to assert his authority, to remind her who was in charge. But the look in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't fear. It was resolve. And in that moment he realized she already knew his time here was over. He turned and walked toward the back office, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood, each step echoing like a countdown. The office was small but neat, his domain. Framed sales charts lined the walls. Awards for top-performing store sat on the shelf, and his nameplate gleamed on the desk. He sank into his chair, running a shaky hand through his hair. He pulled out his phone, thinking maybe he should call corporate, explain before she did. But who would he call, HR? The regional director? They all reported to her, every single one. He opened his email, scrolling frantically for any message that might hint at an upcoming visit. A surprise inspection, anything that could have warned him. Nothing. She'd come without notice, just like she always did. He'd heard rumors about that, how the CEO liked to walk the floor in disguise to see the real truth. He'd laughed it off back then. Too dramatic, he'd said. Real leaders don't play games. Now he wished she had played a game. At least then he'd have known the rules. Outside, the silver sedan hadn't driven away. She was still sitting in it, phone pressed to her ear. From his window, Derek could just make out her profile. Calm, focused, speaking steadily. He couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He knew exactly who she was calling, and he knew they'd listen. Back in the store, Lena had already pulled out her own phone. She stepped into the stockroom away from prying ears and dialed a number she'd been given months ago. Strictly for emergencies, the email had said. If something serious happens involving store leadership, call this line immediately. She'd never thought she'd use it. Hello? This is Lena from the Atlanta boutique, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I need to report an incident. The CEO was just physically assaulted by the store manager. There was a pause on the other end, then a sharp intake of breath. Are you serious? Yes, it just happened. She's fine, she left the store, but he hit her. In front of staff and customers. Stay where you are, the voice said, now urgent. Do not let him leave. I'm alerting corporate security and the board chair. Someone will be there within the hour. Lena hung up and took a deep breath. She walked back into the sales floor, her posture straighter now. She caught Tasha's eye and gave a small, reassuring nod. Then she turned to the other employees. All right, everyone, she said, her voice clear and calm. Let's keep things running as normally as possible. If customers ask questions, just say we're handling an internal matter. And no one talks to Derek unless I'm present. No one argued. In fact, a quiet sense of relief seemed to ripple through the room. For the first time in years, the air felt lighter. Meanwhile, in the car, the CEO ended her call and sat for a long moment, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her cheek was slightly red, but the sting was fading. What lingered was something deeper. The violation, the disrespect, not just of her person, but of everything she'd built. This store wasn't just a business. It was a promise to her team, to her customers, to herself, that people would be treated with dignity no matter their role. And today, that promise had been broken by the very person hired to protect it. She took a tissue from her glove compartment and gently dabbed her cheek. Then she opened her contacts and dialed another number, this one direct to the chairman of the board, a man she'd known for over a decade who'd believed in her vision when no one else would. He answered on the first ring. Hey, it's me, she said, her voice calm but firm. I need you to gather the board. Right now, what's wrong? He asked immediately, hearing the steel beneath her tone. I was just assaulted in my own store, by my store manager. There was a long silence. Then are you hurt? No, but it's not about me. It's about what this says about our culture, about what we allow to happen under our name. I'm calling an emergency session, he said without hesitation. Where are you? Still outside the Atlanta boutique. I'm not leaving until this is handled. Good, stay there. I'll have legal and security on site within 45 minutes, and thank you for telling me. She ended the call and leaned her head back against the seat. She wasn't angry, not in the way people expected. There was no shouting, no tears, no desire for revenge. What she felt was clarity. This wasn't just about one man's outburst. It was about a system that let someone like him rise unchecked. About the quiet suffering of employees who'd been too afraid to speak up. About the gap between the values they preached and the reality on the ground. And she was done letting that gap exist. Back inside the store, Derek paced his office like a caged animal. He'd tried calling a few people, his mentor in corporate, a friend in HR, but no one answered. Or if they did, they sounded distant, cautious, I heard something happened, one said. I can't talk right now. He checked the time. 20 minutes had passed. Surely she would. Didn't go straight to the board. Surely there'd be a warning, a chance to explain. But deep down he knew better. People like her didn't waste time on second chances when lines like this were crossed. He walked to the window again. The silver car was still there. And now a black SUV had pulled up behind it. 2 men in dark suits got out, corporate security. They approached her car, spoke briefly, then stood guard nearby. His stomach dropped. He turned away from the window, his hands shaking. He thought about running, just grabbing his coat and walking out the back door. But where would he go? His reputation was tied to this company. If this got out, and it would, no other luxury retailer would touch him. Not after this. He sank back into his chair, staring at the framed photo on his desk. Him accepting the Manager of the Year award 2 years ago, smiling proudly hand in hand with the regional VP. Back then, he'd felt invincible, like he'd earned his place through sheer will and discipline. Now he wondered if he'd ever really earned it at all, or if he'd just been good at looking the part while stepping on everyone beneath him. Outside, the CEO got out of her car and walked toward the boutique, flanked by the 2 security officers. She didn't look at the SUV or the men beside her. She kept her eyes forward, her expression unreadable. When she reached the door, she paused, took a breath, and pushed it open. The bell above the door chimed softly, the same sound that greeted every customer. But this time it felt like a gong announcing judgment. All eyes turned to her. Staff straightened up. Customers froze. Even the jazz music seemed to hush. She walked straight to the back, past the displays, past the registers, past the employees who now stood a little taller, as if her presence had given them permission to breathe again. She stopped outside the office door. Didn't knock. Just opened it. Derek looked up, his face pale, his eyes wide with panic. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of everything unsaid, "You don't get to decide who belongs here." "You never did," he opened his mouth, but she held up a hand. "Don't speak. Don't explain. You've said enough." She turned to the security officers waiting just outside the door. "Please escort him out. He's not to take anything from this office, not papers, not personal items. We'll send his belongings after a full review." Derek stood abruptly. "You can't do this." "I have rights. I've given this company everything." "You gave it your ego," she said calmly. "Not your heart. Not your respect. And that's not what we're built on." He looked at her, really looked at her. Not as a woman in jeans, but as the force that had created this world he'd taken for granted. And in that moment he saw it. The depth of her resolve, the quiet power that didn't need to shout to be obeyed. He didn't resist as the security officers stepped in. He didn't argue as they guided him out of the office, through the store, past the silent staff, and out the front door. When the glass door closed behind him, the entire store seemed to exhale again, this time with relief. The CEO stood in the center of the floor, looking around at the faces of her team. No grand speech. No dramatic declaration. Just a simple, sincere question. "Is everyone okay?" Tasha nodded, tears in her eyes, but a small smile forming. Lena gave a firm nod. Others murmured yes. She walked over to the scarf display, picked up the silk scarf that had started it all, and gently hung it back on its hook. Then she said, "Let's get back to work. The right way." And for the first time in a long time, the store didn't just look beautiful, it felt like home. The sun had begun its slow slide toward the horizon by the time the CEO stepped back into her car, but the day was far from over. She didn't drive away right away. Instead, she sat with the engine off, watching through the windshield as corporate security finished securing the boutique, locking Derek's office, collecting his access badge from Lena, and quietly informing the staff that the store would close early for an internal review. Customers were politely thanked and sent on their way with discount vouchers for the inconvenience. No drama, no spectacle, just calm, efficient damage control. Inside, the mood had shifted completely. The tension that had clung to the air like static was gone. In its place was something fragile but real. Hope. Employees moved with purpose, not fear. Tasha was restocking shelves with a steadier hand. Lena stood near the front, answering questions from the security team with quiet confidence. For the first time in years, they weren't just workers in a store. They were part of something that felt like it actually cared about them. But the CEO knew this was only the beginning. She pulled out her phone and opened a secure messaging app, one reserved for top leadership. She typed a short message. Emergency board meeting, virtual, 1 hour. Mandatory attendance. She hit send, then leaned back, closing her eyes for just a moment. Her cheeks still felt warm where the slap had landed, but the physical sting was nothing compared to the deeper wound, the betrayal of trust. She hadn't just been attacked as a person. She'd been attacked as a leader, in a space she'd built to be safe, respectful, and fair, and that couldn't go unanswered, not just for her, but for everyone who'd ever been made to feel small in a place that was supposed to lift them up. Back at corporate headquarters, 30 miles away, the message pinged across a dozen devices, in sleek offices with floor-to-ceiling windows, in home studies with children playing in the background, on commuter trains heading out of the city. Board members stopped what they were doing. They knew this tone, knew this urgency. The CEO didn't call emergency meetings unless the foundation was shaking. Within minutes, replies flooded in. On my way. Logging in. I'll be there. 1 hour later, she sat at her kitchen table, still in her jeans and sweater, a mug of tea steaming beside her laptop. The screen lit up with faces. The board chair, a retired retail veteran with silver hair and sharp eyes. The CFO, known for her no-nonsense spreadsheets. The head of HR, who'd been pushing for culture audits for months. And others, each representing investors, legal advisors, or long-time partners in the brand. Thank you for joining on such short notice, she began, her voice calm but carrying an edge that told them this wasn't a discussion. It was a reckoning. Then she told them everything, not with anger, not with theatrics, just facts, clear, precise, and devastating. She described how she'd entered the store in plain clothes to observe operations, how she'd watched the manager berate a young employee over a minor mistake, how she'd intervened, not as a CEO but as a human being disturbed by cruelty, how he'd dismissed her, insulted her appearance, and then, when confronted with her identity, slapped her across the face in front of witnesses. She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. I have security footage, she said, staff statements, customer contact info, and I've already filed a police report for assault. But this isn't just about one violent act. It's about what allowed it to happen. She paused, letting that sink in. For 3 years, this man ran one of our flagship stores with near total autonomy. Sales were strong, so no one looked deeper. But behind those numbers was a culture of fear. Employees were humiliated, silenced, and pushed to the brink. HR complaints were filed, 3 in the last 18 months, but they were dismissed as personality conflicts or performance issues. No one investigated. No one listened. She looked directly into the camera, her gaze steady. We built this company on respect, on the idea that excellence doesn't require cruelty. But somewhere along the way, we started valuing results over humanity. And today that cost me my dignity and nearly cost us our soul. Silence filled the virtual room. No one interrupted. No one defended the old ways. They'd all seen the reports, heard the whispers. They just hadn't acted, because the numbers looked good and the problem was easy to ignore. Now it wasn't. The board chair spoke first. What do you need from us? 3 things, she said without hesitation. First, Derek is terminated effective immediately. No severance. No reference. Full cooperation with law enforcement. Done, the chair said. Second, she continued, we launch an independent review of every store manager in the company, not just HR files. Real interviews with staff, anonymous surveys, unannounced visits. If there's toxicity, we root it out. No exceptions. The head of HR nodded vigorously. I've been asking for this for a year. I'll have a plan by tomorrow. Third, she said, her voice softening just slightly, we apologize to our team. Publicly, not a corporate statement full of jargon, but a real acknowledgement that we failed them, and we commit to change, starting with mandatory leadership training focused on empathy, anti-bias, and emotional intelligence, not as a checkbox, but as a core requirement for anyone in a position of authority. Again, agreement came quickly. No pushback. No, let's think about the optics. Just action. The meeting lasted less than 40 minutes. By the end, decisions had been made, teams assigned, and timelines set. As the faces disappeared from her screen, the CEO let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, but she wasn't done. She opened another tab and drafted an email, not to executives, but to every employee in the company. Subject line, "To my team." It read, "Today, something unacceptable happened in one of our stores. A leader chose violence over respect. That is not who we are. I was there, I saw it. And I will not let it be ignored." Effective immediately, the manager involved has been removed. We are cooperating fully with authorities, and we are launching a full review of leadership across all locations to ensure this never happens again. Most importantly, I'm sorry. Sorry that anyone on our team has ever felt unsafe, disrespected, or unheard. That ends now. You are not just employees. You are the heart of this company. And from this day forward, your dignity comes before any sales target, any metric, any bottom line. I'll be reaching out soon with ways you can share your honest feedback, safely, anonymously, and without fear. Because real change starts with listening. With gratitude, her name, she hit send. Then she closed her laptop and finally took a sip of her tea. It was cold now, but she didn't care. Meanwhile, back at the boutique, Lena was still on the phone. With HR, with legal, with the regional support team. She'd spent the last 2 hours taking statements from staff, listing every incident they could recall. The time Derek mocked someone's accent in front of customers, the way he'd given better shifts only to those who laughed at his jokes, how he'd once made Tasha stay late for a week straight because she needed to learn humility. Each story was a thread in a tapestry of quiet suffering. And now, for the first time, someone was weaving them into something that could bring change. Tasha sat in the break room, wrapped in a light sweater someone had brought her. She'd cried a little, not from sadness, but from relief. "I kept thinking it was just me," she told Lena. "Like maybe I really was too sensitive. But hearing everyone else, it wasn't me. It was him." Lena nodded. "And now he's gone." Outside, a local news van pulled up, but not because of a tip. The CEO had authorized a brief statement to be released to the press. An incident occurred at our Atlanta location involving a former employee. The individual has been terminated, and we are fully cooperating with authorities. Our priority is the safety and well-being of our team. No names, no sensational details, just accountability. Still, word spread fast. By evening, the story was buzzing on social media, not as a scandal, but as a rare moment of justice. People shared the CEO's email, leaked anonymously by a grateful employee, praising her for standing with her staff instead of protecting a high performer. Others posted about their own experiences with toxic bosses, using the moment to speak up. But the CEO didn't watch the coverage. She didn't read the comments. She knew the real work wasn't in the headlines. It was in the quiet conversations, happening in break rooms, in the new policies being drafted, in the courage it would take for people to finally speak their truth. Late that night, she drove back to the boutique. It was closed, dark, the displays softly lit from within. She stood on the sidewalk for a long time, looking at the store she'd poured her heart into. It had felt like a betrayal today, but now, it felt like a beginning. She pulled out her keys, not the corporate fob, but the old brass one she'd kept since day one, and unlocked the side door. Inside, the silence was peaceful. She walked past the scarf display, past the handbags, past the spot where it had happened. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Instead, she went to the back office, now empty of Derek's things, and sat at the desk. She opened a blank notebook and began to write. Not a report, not a plan, just a promise, to herself and to everyone who believed in what this company could be. By morning, that promise would become action. Training modules would be updated, new reporting channels would go live, and in a few weeks she'd host a town hall, not in a boardroom, but right here in this store, where every employee could speak, be heard, and help shape what came next. Because leadership wasn't about titles or corner offices. It was about showing up. even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was truly leading. The days that followed felt like watching a river change course, slow at first, then all at once. News of what happened in the Atlanta boutique didn't explode like a scandal. It spread like truth often does, quietly, person to person, carried by those who'd been waiting for someone to finally say, enough. Within 48 hours, the company issued a public statement, not the usual corporate fluff filled with regret and moving forward, but something raw and real. It acknowledged the assault, confirmed the manager's immediate termination, and announced a full internal review of leadership practices across all locations. Most importantly, it included a direct apology to employees. We failed to protect you. That ends now. People noticed. Not just customers, but other companies, industry groups, even business schools. This wasn't just damage control, it was a reset. Meanwhile, inside the company, things moved faster than anyone expected. The independent review team, hired from outside to avoid bias, began visiting stores unannounced. They didn't just talk to managers. They sat with cashiers during lunch breaks, chatted with stock clerks in the back rooms, and listened, really listened, to what people had to say. And what they heard was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Stories poured in, not just about the fired manager, but about others who'd ruled through fear. The district lead who mocked employees for their accents, the regional trainer who gave better evaluations to those who brought him coffee, the store supervisor who threatened to cut hours if staff didn't smile more for customers. For years, these things had been brushed aside as just how he is, or part of the job. Now they were being documented, reviewed, and, where needed, acted upon. 2 other managers were placed on leave within the first week. One resigned before the investigation even reached his store. The message was clear. Performance numbers wouldn't shield cruelty anymore. Back in Atlanta, the boutique became a kind of quiet symbol. Customers returned, not out of curiosity, but loyalty. Many came just to thank the staff. One woman brought homemade cookies for Tasha, saying, "I saw what happened. I'm glad you're okay." Another left a note at the register. "This place feels different now, like it breathes." And it did. Without the constant tension, the store seemed brighter, warmer. Music played a little louder. Conversations between staff were real, not rehearsed. Lena, now acting store lead, held short team huddles every morning, not to assign tasks, but to check in. "How are you really doing?" she'd ask. And people started answering honestly. The CEO visited again, this time not in disguise, but openly. She walked in on a Tuesday afternoon wearing a simple dress and a light coat. No entourage, no fanfare, just her. The moment she stepped inside, the entire staff looked up. Not with fear, but with something closer to respect and relief. Tasha was the first to approach, holding out a small potted plant with a tag that read, "For your office," to remind you that good things grow when they're treated with care. The CEO took it, her eyes softening. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. She spent the next hour not inspecting displays or checking sales reports, but sitting at a small table near the window talking with whoever wanted to join her. Some shared ideas for new community events. Others asked about the leadership training. One young man who'd only been there 3 weeks admitted he'd almost quit after his first shift under the old manager. "I thought all retail was like that," he said. "But maybe it doesn't have to be." "No," she replied, "it doesn't." Later that week, the company held its first all-hands virtual town hall. Over 2,000 employees logged in from stores across the country. Many expected a polished presentation, a few slides, and a quick Q&A. Instead, the CEO appeared on screen in her home office, no makeup, hair pulled back, speaking straight from the heart. "I'm not here to give a speech," she began. "I'm here to listen." For the next 90 minutes, employees submitted questions and comments through a moderated chat. Some were angry, some were scared, many were hopeful. She answered everyone, not with corporate jargon, but with honesty. When will we see real change? Someone asked. Change starts today, she said. We're rolling out anonymous feedback channels next week. Every store will have a monthly culture check-in, and leadership bonuses will now be tied not just to sales but to team well-being scores. What if we speak up and nothing happens? Another asked. Then you come to me directly, she replied. My email is going out to everyone after this call, not my assistants, mine, and I will read every message. It wasn't perfect. She admitted that. I didn't see this coming, she said. I trusted the system, and the system failed you. That's on me, but I won't make that mistake again. By the end of the call, something had shifted, not just in policy, but in trust. Outside the company, the story kept growing, but not in the way scandals usually do. There were no leaked videos, no dramatic courtroom scenes. Instead, journalists began writing about it as a case study in ethical leadership. A business magazine ran a feature titled, When the CEO Walks the Floor and Gets Slapped for It. A podcast interviewed former employees, anonymously, who described the before and after. Even a few competitors quietly reached out, asking how they could implement similar culture reviews. But the real impact wasn't in the press. It was in the small moments, like when a store in Chicago held its first team meeting where staff could critique management without fear, and the manager actually took notes. Or when a new hire in Denver saw the CEO's town hall recording during onboarding and said, I didn't know companies could be like this. Or when Tasha, after 6 months of silence, finally told her mother what had real. I've been happening at work. And her mom hugged her and said, I'm proud of you for staying, and prouder that they finally listened. As for the man who'd done the slapping, life hadn't been kind to him. Within days, the news of his firing spread through industry circles. His LinkedIn profile, once filled with glowing endorsements, went quiet. Recruiters stopped calling. When he tried applying to other luxury retailers, his name triggered instant red flags. We heard what happened. One hiring manager told him over the phone. We don't take that kind of behavior lightly. He posted a public apology online a week later, a carefully worded statement saying he regretted his actions and was seeking counseling. But it rang hollow. People saw it for what it was, damage control, not remorse. No one shared it. No one defended him. And the CEO never acknowledged it. She didn't need to. His actions had spoken loudly enough. Legal proceedings moved slowly, as they often do. He was charged with misdemeanor assault. The case would likely end in a plea deal, community service, maybe a fine. But the real consequence wasn't legal. It was professional. His career in high-end retail was over. And in the quiet hours, he probably realized that the thing he'd lost wasn't just a job, but the respect of everyone who'd once looked up to him. Back at the company, real change took root. The leadership training program launched with modules on emotional intelligence, unconscious bias, and conflict resolution, not as a one-time seminar, but as ongoing coaching. Managers had to pass assessments not just on sales goals, but on how their teams rated their support and fairness. Promotions shifted too. 2 women from the Atlanta store, Tasha and Lena, were fast-tracked into development programs. Not as tokens, but because they'd shown what real leadership looked like. Patience, integrity, and the courage to speak up when something was wrong. The CEO made sure they were seen. She invited them to sit in on regional planning meetings. She asked for their input on new store designs. And when the company announced its first employee-led community initiative, a partnership with a local youth arts program, she let Tasha present it at the launch event, standing. In front of cameras and executives, Tasha didn't stumble. She spoke clearly, passionately about how the store could be more than a place to buy things, it could be a place to belong. When she finished, the room gave her a standing ovation. Not because she was polished, but because she was real. Months passed. Seasons changed. The boutique in Atlanta became one of the highest-rated stores in the company. Not just for sales, but for employee satisfaction and customer loyalty. People came not just to shop, but to feel seen. And the CEO? She kept visiting. Sometimes in disguise, sometimes not. But always listening. One evening, as she stood near the scarf display, now arranged with even more care than before, Lena came up beside her. You know, Lena said softly. Before all this, I used to dread coming to work. I'd lie awake at night wondering if I'd say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. Now, I actually look forward to it. The CEO smiled. That's the point. It's more than a job now, Lena added. It feels like we're building something that matters. Yes, the CEO said, looking around at the warm lights, the quiet hum of conversation, the staff helping customers with genuine smiles. We are. And in that moment, she knew the slap hadn't broken her. It had awakened something in her team, in the soul of the company. Pain had carved a path to something better. Not perfect, but honest, human, real. That was worth more than any sales report. A year had passed since that afternoon in the Atlanta boutique, the day everything changed. The seasons had turned, the city had grown noisier, and the world had kept spinning as it always does. But inside the walls of that quiet, elegant store, something deeper had taken root. It wasn't just a business anymore. It had become a place where people felt safe, seen and valued, not because of a policy memo, but because the air itself felt different, lighter, kinder. The CEO walked in on a crisp autumn morning, her boots clicking softly against the hardwood floor. She wasn't in disguise this time. Everyone knew who she was, and more importantly, they knew what she stood for. As she passed the entrance, 2 employees greeted her by name, not with stiff formality but with warm smiles. One handed her a small cup of coffee, black just how she liked it, without being asked. "We saw your car pull up," they said with a quiet laugh. "Figured you'd need fuel before the meeting." She thanked them and took a sip, letting the warmth settle in her chest. This was the part no one talked about in boardrooms or business articles. The small human moments that told you real change had happened. Not just on paper, but in practice. Today was special. The company was launching a new pilot program, one dreamed up not by executives, but by the staff themselves. Profit sharing. Not just for managers or corporate leaders, but for every single person who worked in the store, from the cashier to the stock clerk. If the location hit its goals, not just sales, but customer satisfaction, team retention, and community engagement, everyone would see a direct financial benefit. It was a bold move, risky in an industry that usually hoarded rewards at the top, but she'd fought for it. Because if people were going to give their time, their energy, their hearts to this place, they deserved to share in its success. The store had been transformed for the announcement. Not with flashy banners or corporate logos, but with photos, dozens of them, taped to a long corkboard near the fitting rooms. Pictures of team outings, holiday parties, late-night inventory sessions with pizza boxes and tired laughter. There was one of Tasha helping an elderly customer find the perfect scarf. Another of Lena teaching a new hire how to fold cashmere without creasing it. And right in the center, a candid shot from the day after the incident. The whole team standing together, arms loosely around each other, smiling. Not for the camera, but because for the first time, they felt like a family. She paused in front of it, her throat tightening just a little. This was what she'd built. Not just a brand, but a community. At noon, the staff gathered in the center of the store. Chairs had been arranged in a loose circle. No stage, no podium. Just people. The CEO sat among them, not above them. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't stand. She just leaned forward, hands resting on her knees. "I'm not here to give a speech," she began, her voice quiet but clear. "I'm here to say thank you." She looked around at the faces, some familiar for years, others new, all carrying the same quiet pride. A year ago, something broke in this place, and instead of pretending it didn't happen, you helped me fix it. You spoke up. You showed up. You chose to believe we could be better. And look at us now, she gestured to the corkboard. That's not just a collection of photos. That's proof that when we treat each other like human beings, not numbers, not roles, but people, something beautiful grows. Then she announced the profit-sharing pilot. The room didn't erupt in cheers. Instead, there was a collective breath, a moment of stunned silence, then soft murmurs of disbelief, then tears. One young man wiped his eyes quickly, laughing at himself. Tasha reached over and squeezed Lena's hand. No one had expected this. Not really. Afterward, people lingered, talking excitedly about what they might do with their share. Pay off student loans, help a parent with rent, finally take that vacation they'd been putting off. The CEO stayed too, answering questions, listening more than she spoke. She didn't rush off to another meeting. She stayed until the last person had left, until the store was quiet again. Later that afternoon, she sat in a small cafe across the street, watching the boutique through the window. Customers came and went. Staff moved with ease, helping, laughing, connecting. It looked like any other successful store, but she knew the difference. It wasn't in the displays or the price tags. It was in the way a customer's shoulders relaxed when they walked in the way an employee's eyes lit up when they made a genuine recommendation, not just a sale. This was leadership, she thought. Not power, not control, but presence, care, the willingness to stand in the fire so others don't have to. Meanwhile, far from the warmth of the store, the man who had once ruled it with fear was trying to rebuild his life. He'd taken a job at a warehouse far from the polished world of luxury retail. No title, no corner office, just a uniform and a time clock. He rarely spoke to coworkers. He kept his head down as if still waiting for someone to call him out. His public apology had faded into internet obscurity. No one cared anymore, and maybe that was the hardest part, not the shame, but the silence. The realization that the world had moved on without him. He'd tried to reach out once to the CEO through a mutual contact, asking for a chance to explain, to make amends. She hadn't responded, not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to say. Some actions don't need forgiveness to lose their power. They just need to be named, stopped, and never repeated. Back in the city, the CEO's op-ed had gone viral, not in a flashy way, but in the quiet, lasting way that changes minds. Titled "Leadership Isn't a Title, It's How You Treat the Least Powerful Person in the Room." It had been shared by teachers, nurses, small business owners, even military officers. She didn't write it to be famous. She wrote it because someone needed to say it out loud. In it, she wrote, "We've been taught that leaders are the ones with the loudest voices, the biggest offices, the final say. But real leadership shows up in the